some basic principles of the MIP reporting this morning. And a couple things is maybe just a shout out to everybody able to see my screen. You should be seeing the MIP, well, if you will, kind of the home screen, help and support.
I see it.
Okay, very good, very good. Okay, so kind of to get started is really when I approach reporting in MIP, there's almost two levels. One where we go through some basics of how the reporting works, and then what we'll do is probably a follow-up class sometime soon on some advanced principles in the reporting. And that includes things like the advanced principles of things like financial statement formats, charting, report groupings, and things that just add to the ability of the reports. But let's jump in and talk about some of the basics. And what I'm going to do here is go into reports. And what I've chosen to do is just to use the expanded general ledger simply as a starting point. Okay. What we discuss here this morning would probably relate to certain groups of reports have the same principles as we're going to talk about today. The financial statements have a little bit more advanced functionality, but let's start with a basic report. Okay, so here we are. We're in actually editing a report. Okay, and I jumped right through this. Let me come back here to the drop list. Is for the most part, what you're going to see here is when you go into a category of report, whether it be posted or unposted or financial statements or budgetary reports or general ledger analysis reports, you're always going to have a predefined set of reports in the system that are sometimes referred to as templates. And those are the reports in your list that have those pointed brackets out on the left and the right-hand side. And those get installed when the software is installed. And the intentions with those reports are basically just to give you a starting point, that it gives you the ability to basically, you can edit those reports, but the system will force you to save the edits under a brand new name so that the templates always stay intact. And it will add, when you go ahead and save, it's going to add your report into the library that you see here on the screen. Okay. So let's go ahead and pick just this basic report is the first segment in. So what the ideal with this report would be able to go in and run a detailed report based by fund number. And when you first come into the program, you're going to have a setup tab. And with the setup tab, you'll notice just real quickly at the top where you can print the actual name of the report, detailed GL by fund, in the header or the footer, or you can opt not to print it at all. The system's always going to kind of print out the report grouping. For instance, this would print expanded general ledger if I chose not to print the report name. But it's really more statics. It's up to you whether you want the actual report name included. To the right of that, where it says page footer included, that's more or less your date and time stamp of when the report was run. It also will include page numbers. So again, it's up to you as what makes the most sense. Okay. Now, from here, you'll notice that this particular report has 4 different dates. Okay, and sometimes the dates it can get rather complicated, but let me see if I can explain why there's the 4 dates. Okay, well, what happens is oftentimes you start a new fiscal year prior to closing the prior fiscal year. And in some systems, like for instance, if we have some clients that came in from fund where some of your reports were not able to be run in the new fiscal year prior to closing the prior fiscal year. Well, with MIP, the 4-date system is what allows us to basically run a report in the new fiscal year without having closed the prior fiscal year, And what ends up happening is the account balances begin date, which is on the upper left there, that represents basically the last time your fiscal year was closed, plus one day. So this particular system, the fiscal year runs July 1st through June 30th. So what we're saying is our last fiscal year really closed on 6/30/2017. So last time beginning balances were posted were 7/1 of 18. Okay. Below that, the current reporting year begins. In this instance, it's one and the same. But what ends up happening, again, is if you're in an environment where you have multiple fiscal years open, the account balances begin, again, says, when's the last time I closed? The current reporting year begins, says, do a simulated close through a particular date. Okay. And ultimately what that means is, do you ever really have to close a fiscal year in MIP? Well, the answer is no. I'm not sure I would feel comfortable always leaving the fiscal years open, but because of this, the ability to do simulated closes, and it can be more than one fiscal year, you can technically use or leave those years open. To the right of that, under current transaction dates, that just simply says what's in the current reporting year that we're looking for here. What is the date range? Are we looking for maybe just July, maybe just August? Well, in this instance, I've basically opened up the date range to encompass the full fiscal year. So that's the first thing, is the setup tab is a little bit about the appearance of the report, and then the dates control the pool of information that's going to be available to be included on this report. Okay. Now, as we swing over to the content tab, okay, what happens with the content tab is, kind of think of it as the screen is two sections. The upper half of the screen basically controls page breaks. The lower portion of the screen controls column content that you want to include on your reports. Okay. Now, the way this works is on the left side of your screen, there's a predefined list of available items that I'll sometimes call them data items, but they're basically, again, a predefined list of whether it be things like your segments, segment titles, these group codes, which again we'll address in an advanced class. But by literally selecting a value in the window on the left and using the movers, which are your arrow keys, and moving a value from the left to the right, that's the process of selecting. Okay, so for instance here, if I take this segment called department/DOE code and I move it back to from the right to the left, it basically indicates now that what we're going to get is a page break by fund only. If I want to add that back, that page break, I select it, move it to the right, and basically at this point we're instructing the program to do a page break by a combination of these two segments of fund and department/DOE code. Okay. Now, some of the other fields that you're going to see as you go into different reports is there's this ability to sort data. Okay. And the sort, as you can see from the drop down, you can take a field or a data item and sort it in an ascending, descending, or simply tell the system, I don't need to sort by that value. Okay. But the sorts will control the presentation of your information on the page. So if you run something, you know, a particular report, and you don't necessarily like how it's being presented, always consider the sort as a way to go back and make change it from maybe none to ascending or whatnot, and it will change the appearance of the data as it appears on the report. Okay. Excuse me. Okay, now to the right of that is a checkoff box for show total. And again, it's just a check uncheck box, and it does exactly what the name is implying. Is if you want to run a report and get a total by, in this case, the fund segment, and a total by the department segment, then you simply put a check mark in that box, and the system will automatically present that total when the report is either brought up on the screen or physically printed. To the right of that, where we have this little box out here, print, it's not a big shake here or a big deal, but basically the information we're selecting in this upper grid is going to print in the header of our report. And what ends up happening here is based on the segments that we've included, you can either say, well, just give me the segment number, which is they're calling the code, or you can give it the code with its corresponding description. Or vice versa, you can flip it around and go with the description and then the number. Okay, so no big shakes, but nevertheless, it's there. Okay, now you will also see to the right-hand side the up and down arrow keys, and let me just demonstrate that with actually highlight a value and hit the up key, up arrow key. What that does is, notice how, and now hit the down arrow key, it reorders the sequence of your variables or data fields that you've selected. Okay, it probably becomes more important in the lower right-hand grid, where as you're selecting additional fields to be included or column of data to be included on the report, when you select a value, it always puts it at the end of the list. But you can always take that item and say, you know what, I really don't want the effective date to appear after the session ID. You can simply use the arrow keys up or down, and it's going to move the placement of that data on the report so that it gives you a lot of wiggle room as far as designing your report. Okay. If you do have a report that has a lot of fields and you want to just expand your work area, see these little plus signs way out to the right-hand side. If you hit the plus sign, it basically expands the window so that you have more, if you will, real estate on the screen, so you're getting away from some of the scrolling. I can hit the dash and it will minimize it back again. Okay. Now, little note about the lower half of the screen when you talk about columns. Okay, again, you're going to have a predefined list of data items or variables that you can select from. Okay, and I'll be honest with you, I think the MIP documentation does a very good job, which you can access through the help button, and then oftentimes I'll go to the contents and index. But it does a pretty good job of explaining some of these different fields. Like in this report, we're really just dealing with a debit and credit dollar amounts. Other reports have the ability to break things down in a little bit more detail, like budgetary numbers, beginning balances, ending balances, and things of that nature. So always, if you question what is that variable doing or data item, the help screen is pretty good about explaining that. Okay. And then additionally, just a note about these predefined fields. When we get into the financial statements in an advanced class, the financial statements have the ability to add custom fields. So a custom field could be based on a mathematical formula, or it could be based on a date range. Okay, so for instance, you might want to develop a financial statement that says across the top of my report, I want column 1 to be my first fiscal month, column 2 my second fiscal month, column 3 to be my third fiscal month, etc. And we can do that through these user-defined fields, which again, I wanted to mention them so that you're not always limited to just what you see here, as there is more wiggle room with these reports. Okay. Now, again, focusing on the lower right-hand side, we talked a little bit about the sort and the show total. Okay, but in designing your reports, you got to keep in mind that whether you're going to print your report in a portrait or a landscape fashion, and portrait tends to be the default, that you're dealing with a fixed amount of space, so that obviously if you got a portrait, you start with the theory that you have 8.5-inch wide piece of paper. By default, the margins are 1/2 inch left and right, so you're really looking at creating a report or contents that don't exceed 7.5 inches, or it's going to scroll from one page to the next, and it's illegible, and it's just not a nice presentation. On the other hand, if you say, okay, I've got so much that I want to include on this report, and I'm going to need to turn the orientation to more of a landscape presentation, and now you've got the 11 inches less the margins, so you're somewhere out around 10.5 inches. Okay, and to assist in designing those reports, as you'll notice, if you kind of go to the center of the screen and then over to the left, where it says report body and then total width 9.60. Okay, this program does a pretty good job of telling you of all the fields that you've selected in the width of the columns that you've identified, and these are in inches. So, for instance, I could come in here and say, no, let's change this from 1/2 inch to 0.60. And then when I tab out of that field, you'll notice that value report body width increases. So it helps me know that when I'm actually creating a report, is it going to fit on the page? Okay, so you've got that that little help back and forth with page widths, or excuse me, column widths, along with the report total width in the upper left. Okay. And then, of course, too, you can always, up here when the series of icons, the print preview icon, you can certainly always click on that as well. And what happens is the system's going to display your report on the screen. It does display it with regards to the page orientation and the margins, and you can physically see if the page or your report data is fitting on a page. And oftentimes, by seeing a page number on the lower right, that's a good indicator that the report fit on a single page. Okay. So let me go ahead and close that out. Okay, and just talk a little bit of a couple other fields. Here is lower right, we've got the show repeats and the wrap. Okay. Again, these are really more aesthetics of the report. They don't control the data, but it controls the presentation of the data on the page. And something like with the show repeats is, if you have, like in this case, the account code, and maybe it will look best with a picture. Let me come up here and do this. Okay, I've got the show repeats checked off. And you'll notice running down the left-hand side margin of this report is the 52,400 or 4,000, 52,900, 53,000. It repeats itself. Okay. If I wanted to clean that up and perhaps make a little different appearance, if I uncheck the show repeats and run this up to the screen, okay, what you'll see is this does have a beginning balance line, but as you can see, the number of times the system repeats itself, it only does it when a value changes. So it changes, again, the aesthetics of the report. Okay. Totally up to you on how that looks. And for the most part, MIP has determined which fields you can check off any one of these boxes. If it's highlighted in that grayish blue, it basically means it's a default value and you can't check or uncheck. Okay. From there, we have the wrap to the right, which just basically means if space is a premium on my report, and I've got a field that has a lot of data in it, perhaps a description, perhaps an account code title. If you have to limit the width of that column, but you want the system to pull or print the full description of what you're looking at, you can put a check in the wrap field, and what that does is it won't end up truncating your data, but literally it will wrap it down to a second line so that you'll get all the information that you need to see. Okay. And just a note about that is the wrap often is going to, of course, expand the length of your report top to bottom because it's going to use extra lines. Sometimes it's the presentation gets a little ugly, but you can play with these. You know, keep in mind you're designing your own report. You can design it, run it. If you don't like it, come back in, modify it, and play with it. Test things and see what ultimately looks the best. Okay. Now, and then finally, on the right-hand side of this content tab is if you prefer to change an account title, feel free to go right ahead and type that in. Okay. Now, once we have basically, again, the Setup tab define the pool of numbers we're looking for, the content is changing or designing the page breaks and the column content. The Filter tab, on the other hand, basically says, okay, I've got this big pool of information. In other words, maybe you're in an entire month or a quarter or a fiscal year. Then the filter says, okay, what are you interested in? Do you want everything? Or maybe you just want a particular fund or a particular department or maybe a particular project. And obviously I'm talking about chart of account segments. But if you were interested in maybe saying, you know what, I need a particular session, whether it was posted or unposted, or you wanted to run things based on any one of, again, this predefined list of variables on the left, you can basically go in and select a value. And when you move it from left to right, and let me click on that, is this compares to column has these different operators that you can see, which run the gamut from you're looking for something specific. In other words, equals, less than, not equal to, greater than, between, not between, the likes, the not likes, the ends. So there's different, this is basically an action field that says, well, what do you need? And just back here, just what you're seeing here is I've asked this report to run for any account codes greater than 52000 because I'm looking for a specific, in this case, types of accounts, which are purchase of services. Okay. So there's one operand. Then we go down to the fund code, and I'm only interested in my fund equal to 001, which is my operating fund. And then here, when we get to the department field, the N is kind of a handy in the sense that it lets you, in your criteria 1 field, make a list of comma-separated values so that if you have values that are consecutive that you're looking at, you might consider using the between, because now you can put in a range in criteria 1 or 2. But if you're trying to filter on something that is not necessarily a consecutive list of numbers or whatnot, you can create a list by using the in operator and separating your values with a comma. Okay, so that gives you a lot of power as far as the size of ultimately what you're looking for on your reports. Okay. Now, as we proceed down, the groups, which will be a subject for our advanced class, but just briefly, what the groups are is it's the ability to take your segments, your chart of account segments, and basically maybe sort of group segments in a specific order. Like you might come in and say, I'm going to base this on my account field or GL field, and I want to group all my salary accounts. And then I want to group something like all my expense accounts or all my capital accounts. But it's a grouping that goes beyond the use of a segment. Okay, so we will touch on that in more detail in the classes to be coming. Okay. With the Options tab, will be a bit different for each report. Okay, and it's basically a way of, again, controlling the type of data that you see on your report. And for the most part, oftentimes you'll see, do you want to include it unposted sessions? Do you want to summarize amounts, which simply means it really relates back to the contents that you selected? If, for instance, you simply wanted to say, give me my account, the effective date, and the debit and the credit, then by summarizing, what the system will do is basically give you a total debit figure or a total credit figure for that particular one single effective date, as opposed to itemizing the detail. But easy to forget the Options tab, but there's some pretty handy things there. Suppress lines with all zeros to clean up your report a bit. This one's kind of handy where the subtotal by calendar month, rather than you exporting the report to Excel and doing subtotals by month, you can put a check mark here and the system will do it for you automatically. Okay, so not to forget the Options tab. It will deviate, as I said, from report to report. Okay. Now, earlier we mentioned a report by default is typically portrait. Well, how do you change that orientation to landscape? How do you change your margins? And for that matter, if you were interested in changing fonts and font sizes. Okay, well, that happens on the Layout tab. Okay, and I'll be honest with you, most times when I come to the Layout tab, I'm going to the lower right-hand side where it says Page Setup. And when I click on that, this is where lower left is where I can go from portrait to landscape. And as you can see, to the lower right is where you can control your up, left, right, up and down margins. Okay. So that can theoretically, will give you more real estate on your printed page so your data fits. Okay. I've never really, to be honest with you, done anything with the fonts. But there certainly can, if you want to change a font style, it's just a matter of basically you click on a field and hit Font Setup, and that gives you the opportunity to change one font and styles and sizes. Okay. And then finally, we have our Security tab, which when you look at it, it looks a little lame. There's only one question there. But it's actually a very powerful question. And what it does is by putting a check mark here and by saving my report, what that will do here is, let me bring it back up in the drop down, is you'll notice we were working on this detailed GL by fund. And now this report is, I'm logged in as admin currently. And you can see that this report is now secured by admin. And what that basically means is I'm going to let other people run this report if they want, but I don't want necessarily anybody to change that report. This is important to me. I've designed it. I'm happy with it. People can use it, but don't change it. And that's what the security check mark does, is it says the only person that can indeed change this is the person that secured that report. Okay. Now, just like you can take any one of these, again, reports within the pointed brackets are the templates, just like you can take those and basically use this, come in and modify a value. And let me just show you this real quickly here. If I go to change a value and I go to save that, the program basically says, well, wait a minute, this is a report template. You're changing the template, so that's okay. But before you can save it, you got to give it a new name. Okay, so that's one way of basically renaming or copying a report. The other way is, let me just close out of here, and I'm going to tell it to save that. Now, I'm kind of messing that up. Let me just make it real fast. Okay. The other way that you can deal with a group of reports, like you might come in here and say, geez, that's a good report. I want one similar to it, but I might want to add maybe a couple of columns or change a sort order, and I'd like to do that and catalog the report so that I don't have to change the parameters each and every time. Well, what you can do is this icon on the upper left, which is, it's like the two discs with the green arrow, is when you click on that, okay, this is the ability to go in and basically select a report and copy it to a new name. Well, previously, you maybe even have created a report and gave it a name, and you're like, oh, I don't really like that. Let's change it up a bit. So what this will allow you to do is either the copy or the rename, and the system will walk you through. Like you can come in here and say, okay, I like that detail by general fund, and I'll just call it test 1 just to show you what that will do. Okay. It also has the security element here in the box as well. But that, as quick as that, by saying that, the system has made a copy, leaves us in the edit mode for that report, and off we go. We're ready to do our thing. Okay. Now, let's do this. Let me come back to this report and tell you a couple other things I wanted to mention here in this particular class is excuse me, I had a little coughing thing going on. With your MIP reports, certainly you can, with the different icons, you can print a screen, which again is your data without regard to your margins and whatnot. It prints it up a little larger. The print preview shows you what it would look like on the printed page. But you also have different exports. There's the red door export, which we'll discuss in another session. We're going to focus on the Excel exports, the PDF exports, and then the ability to email. Well, with the Excel exports, you can either run the report and look at it on the screen and say, yeah, that looks good, let's export it to Excel. Or you can simply say, select the report and export it directly to Excel. You don't necessarily have to display it on the screen. But one of the often overlooked boxes on the export to Excel is down the bottom here where it says remove report headers and footers and page breaks. If you're looking for just, I'm going to say raw data, but let me go ahead and hit that. If you want your data to export into Excel, and the idea that you don't have to go back and clean up the page breaks and the column titles on every single page, by hitting that checkbox, as you can see, we get a nice clean export into our Excel so that we now have some working data in any functions in Excel that you're familiar with, and whatever you might want to do with this data, it's nice and clean. Okay, so the idea there was, again, is let me close out of here, is that Excel export. Again, don't overlook the power of that remove report headers box towards the bottom. Okay. Now, we also have a PDF export, which is going to create us a PDF file report. And what you'll notice about that is for all MIP installations, there is a file folder called MIP Share, and there's several subdirectories within that folder. By default, the system wants to put your PDF exports into the report PDF files of this MIP Share folder. But you can certainly designate any place you want those to go to. But you'll see that it's given the report, the file name, if you will, or the PDF is given the name of the report itself. And if I go ahead and say OK to that, this is just simply telling me, hey, I've already got this report in the folder. Can I overwrite it? Okay. But it's writing this out. Okay. If I then go to my browser, and I go to, in this case, I let it go to that default folder, which is the MIP Share, and down here to report PDF files. We'll see right here at the top of the list, and I'll go ahead and open it up, is we get a nice looking PDF report that we certainly could share with others. It could be printed, it could be emailed or whatnot. Okay, so both of those exports, whether it's Excel or PDF, are pretty handy tools to be used. And again, you don't have to store this where the system defaults. You can make your decisions where you want that report to basically go. Okay. Now, just to kind of wrap up a bit before we get to the questions, is there's also this email component. this icon here, which if I want to directly email this report to an individual or a number of individuals, by clicking on the email icon, as you can see, it opens up this template where it's getting my email address from the user setup file in MIP, and it's going to automatically attach the report to this email, and we can go ahead and designate who we're sending it to. Okay, that works rather well if you're not emailing reports constantly or a large volume. Just as a quick aside for those folks that do a lot of emailing is MIP does have what they call their scheduler application, and in general what it is it's the ability to really set up reports, put some filters in there perhaps, and really identify who you want to send them to and how frequently. So if you find yourself running reports and putting them in inboxes for individuals or emailing reports manually, there is maybe something you'd want to look at is the scheduler, which has the ability to automate that, and you determine when to run it and who you want things to send to. But once you get beyond that initial setup, it's pretty handy in that it's your monthly obligations or whatever time frame you're obligated to share your financials, they can be done through the scheduler. Okay. So that's basically what I wanted to run through is with these just again a introduction to reports or an overview of the basics. And I guess we can open it up for questions if anybody has anything. Nothing? Everybody should.
It looks like there's a question from Debbie, and yes, the session will be recorded, and I will share the recording to everyone. There's also another question about how do you access the scheduler?
Okay, what it is up here under System. What you do is when the scheduler is purchased, we install it, and the system will put an icon on this report screen just to the right of the email, and that's basically how you can set up and schedule reports to be sent is through a brand new icon that comes up on the screen. I guess if I had my sales hat on, I would have installed the scheduler.
Last call for anyone with questions.
Nothing?
Just a question from Debbie, just FYI, once their video is complete, I will email the link to everyone that attended this webinar, so you will have that information very, very shortly. If there's no more questions, thanks everyone for watching and attending. If you have any future questions, feel free to email any of us. We sure love to talk to you, and we really appreciate you hanging out and watching this webinar with us. Also, if you have any future topics you would like us to address, we'd love that information as well. Thanks everyone. We're going to call it.
Beautiful. Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Oh,
Bye.
Excuse me. I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
I do have a question.
Okay.
But these are mainly it's not like it's not reports related questions. So it's like transactions. Is that okay? Like if I wanna do like if I'm doing AP transactions. First of all, if something has been posted twice with the same reference number, maybe the same invoice number, would I get an alert saying that this has been entered previously, or this invoice has been like?
Yes, you can get an alert. It depends on how the system's been set up. And if you'd like, I'd certainly, if you feel comfortable, give me a call. I can give you my direct line, and we can look directly at that question. But yeah, it's through the setup, the system, and one of the organization setup screens. You can have the system tell you when something is double posted, and we can even go through reversing something that was double posted if you'd like.
Okay. Okay, and I have another question.
Sure.
Is there any way that, I'm not sure if the system has this feature though, in MIP that you can, so basically if I want to post one invoice, but this invoice has 2 periods or maybe multiple periods, like, you know, this invoice doesn't belong to only one period, it belongs to maybe 3, 4 periods, you know, it belongs to January, February, March, and April. Is there any way in the same entry, you know, this invoice, particular one invoice, get posted to multiple periods, or it's going only to be posted to one period?
Well, my first reaction is it probably makes sense in MIP software land is maybe to set that up as a reoccurring entry, so that you post it, well, set it up for the first entry and then tell the system the frequency of the reoccurrence. And we can even set it up so that the system will say, okay, your reoccurring entries are due. And it's just a matter of, at that point, instead of reposting the whole thing month after month after month, you just answer a couple of questions with a click, and the system will reestablish that invoice for the current period.
Oh, great. Okay. So it can be for future periods or previous periods?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yep.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. With the same invoice number, with the same information and everything, with the same coding and everything?
Yeah, I mean, if it's the same invoice number for the same vendor, it's probably the system. If we set up the warning, it will come back and say something to the effect that this is a duplicate. Do you want to proceed? So it's gonna, you know, again, depends on what warnings we set up. But yeah, you can definitely do all that. And that's not a. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, so it's a duplicate, but it's going to be posted to a different period though. So that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, yep. That's fine.
Okay. Nice. Yep. Thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah. Can I get your contact information? So.
Sure. Absolutely. My name is Kathy Dwyer, and my direct line is 781-561-7826. And just for those that are still on the call, in Winternote, I don't have it in front of me, but we also have an 800 number, so that if I'm not readily available, our 800 support line is, we have somebody always there to answer it, and we'll distribute the phone calls to the next available support rep.
Okay.
But, certainly we've talked to you. Sure, give me a call and we can follow up on these items.
Okay. Thank you, Kathy.
Excellent, thank you. And thank you, Cindy. That is that number, 800. Awesome.
Okay.
Okay.
One last call for questions. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.